Okay, so the man I have sitting beside me here is a man that doesn't need any introduction for anybody that has loved, modified, or in any part of most Datsun products. John Morton. John is involved with most of us. We've grown up with pictures of John driving roadsters, driving Z cars, sorry, my Canadian accent coming through. Driving 510s, whatever. This was early in John's career, and I'll definitely get on to letting him discuss what it was like to be part of those teams and events. But John's career started quite young. He was born in Illinois in 1947 and 42. Look a day younger, day older. John has taken part in motorsports since he was quite young, and I'll let you just explain a little bit of your earlier part of your career. How did you start, get involved, and where did it really begin?
Well, I can't. The first racing was go-karts, and that was, you had to be 21 to race back then, and they didn't invent go-karts till I was about 16, so I didn't race go-karts like kids do now when they're 8. I was 18, so I had to wait 10 more years than most kids today. But that was my first real racing. I did a lot of street racing with my MG when I was in high school, and stupid stuff like that. And then when I went to college, I went to Clemson, in South Carolina, and my parents gave me money to go to the movies, and I was wandering around. I was very lonely because I'd never been away from home that long before, and I was wandering around town trying to relieve the boredom of school. About 2 weeks after the school year started in 1962, and I came upon these young punk kids that were racing jalopies, and I said, how do you get involved in this? And they said, well, you just get a car. And I said, you have to be 21? They said, no, they don't care how old you are. This is rural South Carolina. I said, so if I had a car, I could race? And they said, yeah. So that week, I withdrew all the money my parents had given me to go to the movies, which was $43. And my friend, the guy who had become my friend, Dan Baker, said, we'll go over to Seneca and see if we can find a car, suitable car. So we were driving around and went into a car lot. It was a 1944 two-door sedan, which today would probably be worth, in the condition that one was in, maybe $8,000–9,000, and asked the guy what it was selling for, and he said $65. So we only have 43. And he said, okay, I'll take it. So I drove the car. It would run. I drove it back to Clemson. This was about a 5-mile trip back to Clemson. Went to class, and my friend cut the fenders off with a cutting torch, and I raced it that weekend at the Seneca Speedway. So that was my first time I ever raced a real car.
And how old were you then?
18.
18. Your waist? So.
No, not even close. There was a guy who actually was a good driver. He drove a Chevy, I think it was a 37 Chevy, and his car owner owned the racetrack, and he ran liquor, and he had a lot of tattoos before it was in style. I remember one night, this is all in that thing I wrote, that book, the Shelby book, but his name was Floyd Holcomb, and the Chevy was really fast for that kind of a quarter mile, the kind of racing, very backwoodsy racing. And they'd lighten the car, they cut the bottom of it out. There was almost just a shell of a car. And Floyd used to get a little buzz before he would, kind of like I did before I had to speak, only before he raced. And I met him under the grandstand once. I just went over there to buy a hot dog, and he was under the grandstand with his car owner, who was also the track owner, drinking hot, bootleg liquor, moonshine. And they said, "You want some? And it'll make you drive better." And I said, "No, thanks." But anyway, Floyd, I remember one night, there was a little grandstand when some of the local people would come to the races, and he was standing in his car, because it didn't have any floor, peeing. in front of the grandstand. But he didn't know anybody could tell, because he's inside of his car, but there's a stream of water flowing out, like he'd blown a radiator or something. But anyway, that was the level of racing I started at. And no, I never won.
That's an awesome story, John. Well, I think you've met some of the people here today as you've arrived, and the community here has got every level of car. There are people here with their first cars. There are people here who have had their cars since these cars were brand new in the late 60s or early 70s. So within this crowd, there's quite a few, but there's also a number of people here that have operated cars in many levels of motorsport. So from grassroots, first time out on autocross or something very simple. We've got a number of people that have competed at an SCCA level or club level, and then there are a few people here that have taken part in or competed in national levels as well. And of course, this is how you started. You started. I've read through some of your history here, and eventually you made your way from South Carolina and you made your way into California. You were going to school. And you fell into this rough crowd that hung around with Carroll Shelby. So, and I guess this is how you got started. Maybe you can share with us a little bit of how you got started, and how do you walk into a shop with a guy that's already well known, and you just kind of show up and go, "Hey, can I somehow be part of your team?"
Yeah. Well, it doesn't work like that. Actually, when I went to the stock car thing, that was 60, not 62. I forgot, because it was right after high school. I wanted to race cars, and I wrote a letter. I could write, but my mother wrote the letters. She wrote a letter to England about the Cooper driving school. I had a racing school. Racing schools were not very. There were very few at the time. And none in America, I don't think, except Shelby's, and I didn't know about his yet. They wrote back and said our school is no longer operating, the Cooper School. They suggested I call write the Jim Russell School, so I had my mother write the Jim Russell School, and they never answered. Because I was prepared to move to England and start racing over there. So then I had seen an article in one of the magazines about Carroll Shelby had a driving school called Carroll Shelby School of High Performance Driving in California. I lived in Illinois at this time, and I had my mother write him a letter. I wasn't a very good writer back then. I'm still not very good, but keep me from writing a book. So Shelby answered right away. It wasn't Carroll Shelby answered. Somebody from Shelby's answered and gave me an appointment. It was $1,000 for a week for 5 days, which was a lot of money, but I had some money left over because I left school after 2 years. And so I had some more money to further my education. Decided to do it in California at Shelby School. Well, I got there, and the car, I was walking around. I got there several days early because I was very eager. And a guy walked up to me. He didn't walk up, he rode up on a little Honda 50 motorcycle. And he said, "What are you doing here?" And I said, "Well, I'm going to go through the Shelby driving school. I've got an appointment." And I told him my name, and he said, "You don't start until next week." And I said, "Well, I know, early, but I'd like to watch the next student. He said, my name's Pete Brock. And I thought, and I'm going to be your instructor. And I thought, I got screwed. $1,000 for Pete Brock? I never heard of him. I thought I was going to have Carol Shelby for my instructor. And I'm not, this isn't a joke, this is serious. I blew $1,000 on Pete Brock. And anyway, I had to be congenial about it. So when my school term came, my 5 days, Peter said, you're going to have to, this is your school car. It was $500 if you used your own car, but I didn't have my own car suitable for that. So they gave me the very first prototype Cobra that was ever made. That was the school car, because they had done the magazines, it had been painted a couple times, and now it was put out to pasture at the school. Cobra, there'd never been a Cobra in a race before, but it was to race shortly, and they had a racing version they were building. So I was thumping around Riverside in this old, basically a junker, which incidentally sold last August at Monterey for $12.5 million. It appreciated quite a bit.
How big a handful was that thing?
It wasn't all that fast. It was pretty thrashed. But it was faster than anything I'd ever driven. But I did okay in the school. About the third day of the school, Lancer Ventlo came out with the last of the Scarabs. It was a rear-engine car. And Peter and I got to go to lunch with him. And that was a pretty big thrill, because my favorite car had always been the Scarab. Not that one, but the front-engine car, which I, many years later, got to drive in vintage races. And then the next day, Carol Shelby came out. I'd never met him yet. And he had the Cobra that was going to be, it was really the first race car. Billy Krause was the driver. You guys probably don't know much about the Shelby history, but Billy Krause was Shelby's first driver. And he tested the car, and I wanted to meet Shelby, and I asked Mr. Brock, or I asked Peter if he'd introduce me, and he did. And I built up my nerve, and I asked Shelby if I could maybe have a job in his new sports car company, and he said, come and see me Monday, which this was maybe Thursday or Wednesday. Finished the school on Friday, and then I stayed in, went to Ventura to visit a distant relative, and then came back on Monday and went into Shelby's and said, I'm ready to, And he said, okay, come here, I'll show you what I want you to do. He took me downstairs, showed me where the mops were and the buckets, and I became the janitor. I didn't start out as a race mechanic. I never was. But I was a janitor, and that's how I started. And 2 years later, I ended up driving on the team. So that was a pretty big thrill for me.
So it must be gratifying to know that you started in there literally as nobody, and here you are 2 years later, just driving with the team.
It shows you that I could always fall back into my old profession.
So this wasn't the beginning of your motorsport. Obviously, you started driving. How long did you stay with Carol? And in that mid-60s era, where did that take you?
It took me to the pinnacle, and then it dropped me off like a rock. Once Shelby went to Europe, he only took the very best guys, and he had his pick of any driver in the world. That he had Gurney and Phil Hill and Walt Hanscom. I don't know if you've heard of any of these people, but they were very famous at the time and very good. Ken Miles, obviously, Bruce McLaren, Denny Holm. So, I was left on my own, and I languished in club racing with my own Lotus 23 from 1965 until 1969 when Peter Brock hired me to be the janitor. No. No, he hired me to work in the shop, not to drive. And I was working for a company for $3.20 an hour, making oil pans for race cars, when he called and he offered me a job, and I said, I'll come down and see you, and I did, and he offered way more than I was, not a lot, but a lot more than I was making, and I built up my nervousness. I'll take the job under one condition, and that is that I get to a tryout when the second Roadster's finished. And he said, okay. So that's how that started.
So at the time you moved with Peter Brock, so you told us how you'd met him originally with Carol Shelby, and then you moved, he contacted you and you'd hired on a job, but initially it wasn't actually to drive, it was really actually just to assist with the team and get things going. Peter was, of course, his team was fairly new, he was just building that up. He'd been racing for a few years on his own, but he was really just building up his new program, and I guess Datsun on the horizon was just a brand new player with him. He'd just gotten in with Datsun competition, and Datsun had corporately decided to take a new direction and start putting in money, and so you kind of landed there at the right time.
Yeah, I guess I did, yeah, and it was, but the Datsun had already been racing. They had another team before Peter. It was a team, and Peter had raced too. He had a company, BRE raced a crummy little Japanese car called the Hino, and they weren't very, they weren't very successful. And when that went away, he ended up parlaying that into the Datsun thing. He went to I think he went to the Datsun competition first in Gardena, California, and they said, we've already got a team that's perfectly capable of losing, as you will too, with the Datsun Roadster, because the car isn't any good. That's in essence what they told him. But Peter said, well, I'd like to give it a shot, and he went, they said no, and he pulled some strings in Japan relative to the Hino deal, and they sent him a couple of Roadsters, and the rest is kind of history. The first driver was a guy named Frank Manise, and he did well, and then when the second car was finished, I won a lot of races with that, so I became one of his main driver, I guess. And the other team just went away. That was Dwayne Fuhrhelm. You know him, remember Marshall? In fact, the funny thing happened when I was making oil pans for $3.20 an hour. I moved up from $3 to $3.20, and a guy came. This Dwayne Fuhrhelm came to the shop called Aviate Metal Products, and he said he wanted to make an oil pan for the Datsun Roadsters that he was running on his team, and I said, if you ever need a driver to drive on your team, he already had a couple drivers. I said, I'm perfectly available. And he never responded. Maybe he said, oh, okay. Nothing ever happened. And then when I started driving for Pete, I thought it was kind of poetic justice. So the Datsun Roadster was the first car first time I'd ever driven a Japanese car, and I thought they were really ugly when I first saw them, because they looked like a poor copy of an MG, but then I started to really love them when we started winning races, and now I think they're pretty cool.
So you got to be in a unique position because, of course, Peter did prove himself in the Roadsters. He did get significantly more backing, which gave your team the ability to not only expand, but really up the game with the quality of the machinery you're involved in. Of course, we all know that you drove the machinery, but what a lot of people don't know is that you actually helped out more than you might be giving yourself credit for. You were a bit of a fabricator, and you learned a number of things coming up. Obviously, having to work on your own vehicles and having to do your own work, but you contributed a significant amount to that early BRE effort.
Well, the reason I contributed, at least to begin with, is when the second Roadster was done, I got to drive it. So I worked really hard and fast on it. But it was still a nice car. I mean, it wasn't like crude. It wasn't quick and dirty. But I did it. I think that's the most work I ever did in the shortest amount of time in my life, because I knew it was going to be a car I could race. The irony was, well, it's not an irony. I'm not sure what exactly it was, but the first race we were going to race that car, and I was going to be the driver, was at Sears Point. You know, where they call it Mazda Race Week. This was 1969, and Peter said, I was pretty nervous because you know, my job was on the line, and Peter said, on the race morning, you drive out to the track with my wife, with Susie. And I said, sure. So I came out with Susie, and Susie was late, as sometimes women can be. And as we pull up, I see my friggin' Datsun driving around the track with another driver in it. And I thought, whoa, what's this all about? And it's a really good driver named John Morton, who I think Peter originally thought would drive the second car instead of me. And I got there and I said, why is Morton driving my car? He said, well, you were late. And I said, that's because I came with your wife and she was late. So, anyway, I did run the race. And the funny thing about that race, it was 1969. I don't remember the date. I should, because just before the cars were lined up on the grid, the D-production race, and the announcer held the race because Neil Armstrong was getting ready. The lunar lander was coming down, and it landed. And when it landed safely, they started the race. And when we got home, back to El Segundo, I remember going into a gas station and watching Armstrong walk out of the plane and take that step. But that was, I'm not implying there was any level of importance to my racing a Datsun for the first time, but that was kind of the same day.
It's got to be memorable. I mean, that period of time, which I'm afraid to say I was too young there, because I was a twinkle in my father's eye or my mother's eye yet, but no, it was an exciting time for everybody, I think, lunar landing. Of course, this is when the BRE started building up, and leading up to the 1970 season, you actually had a very short time frame to put these cars together and get out for your first race. And I think a number of people have probably seen the brief history in the Against All Odds video, which most of the 510 and, well, any of the Datsun enthusiasts have probably watched more than 1 million times, according to YouTube and the counter they have going there. But it does chronicle a neat little timepiece in history, where it not only shows the cars and shows yourself being an integral part of that team, but it also shows what it took to get the team up. Now, there's got to be stuff behind the scenes that obviously they're not going to cover in a movie, but there must be important stuff that it really took you guys to get to the level of preparation and to get the top level of competition that you were truly at that time. You were being watched nationally by a lot of people, and there was a little bit of pressure that obviously goes involved with that. So going from your club level racing, and now you're stepping up to almost into the professional circle. That must have been quite exciting for yourself. Maybe you share a little bit about that.
Yeah, we had already done the Z car. We'd already won the 71 national championship, and there's 70 in the Z. In 71, we ran concurrently with the 510, the Z car and the 510. But yeah, the first race was at Briar, New Hampshire, and I was so nervous. I remember I'd never been so nervous. I couldn't eat. I remember looking at a hamburger thinking I couldn't eat that thing right now, because the race was coming up and we got pole position. I didn't think a Datsun would have a prayer against the Alphas, particularly, and the BMWs. but we had the pole and led the race, got in the lead right at the start, led the race, and melted a CV joint after about half the race, and we didn't win. But that was, at that point, I wouldn't say my nerves went away, but I realized we had a potential winner. And then we consistently, we won a lot of races after that. And, looking back, it was a momentous time for me and for BRE and for Datsun. As far as racing, it wasn't the Indy 500, it wasn't the World 600 or the Daytona 500, but it was a big deal to us, and it was a big deal apparently to a lot of other people, and a lot of people finally realized that the Japanese could build more than zeros.
Well, I don't, before we keep going here, but if you guys in the crowd, you've got a question that you want to interject or add at the time, please feel free to do so. It's truly, this is an interact, this isn't an interview. John's here to speak with you, and if you do have questions, certainly bring it forward.
What's your most memorable race that you reflect on the most?
In my life,
Yeah.
does it have to be in a Datsun? The last I went to that racing school I talked about with the Cobra at Riverside, and that's the first time I knew of Riverside. It was a very famous track. And it was 1985, I was driving a 962 for BF Goodrich, and Pete Halsmer and I won the race at Riverside. And they said that was going to be the last race at Riverside, because it was going to be raised for a shopping center and a bunch of stuff, useless stuff. And so we won. And then they said, we're going to, we've extended the time, we're going to run a race in '86. So in '86, I was driving for Busby again, and we didn't win. I think we broke. I can't remember. The same car, 962 Porsche. So I thought, well, I'm not going to win the last race at Riverside. So they said, well, we're going to have another race. We're going to have one more last race in 1980. This is the third last race. 1987, and I was driving a Jaguar for Bob Tullius GTP car, and Hurley Haywood and I drove, and our car really wasn't the fastest car. Chip Robinson was ahead very late in the race, and Bob and Al Holbert's 962, and I was able to catch him, and I passed him with one lap to go, so I won the last race at Riverside. So that's my favorite race.
So obviously this was important to you because you gave it. You had multiple chances, but you kept at it. You were adamant that this was going to be something you're going to put in your cap and work hard to get there, and obviously achieve that.
Yeah, I didn't really expect it. It was just one of those things where everything fell into place. And the race with the 510 in 1971, where we won the championship at Laguna, would have to be second, I think, because we had to win, and the Alpha had to win. Whichever one won was the champion. And we only had two cars, and they had lots of, there were lots of people running Alphas. And I had the pole again. I think that's this 510 that the BRE 510, it raced, I know this, it raced 19 times in its life. It had the pole 16 times. It won 12 races, and it led every race it ever ran. So that's got to be my favorite car. Anyway, we would have won, I believe, but we made a pit stop for fuel, which we had always done, and the Alpha didn't. And they found out after the race there was it wasn't exactly a protest. I think everybody was suspicious. The car had an 18-gallon, 15-gallon tank, so they were disqualified and we won, so we won the championship.
8 miles of fuel line.
What's that?
8 miles of
No, it just had, no, what they did, the can that held the cell, they had a big can and probably a 15-gallon cell, I don't know, but it just turned into a balloon, and it held 3 extra gallons. And when he crossed the finish line, he had won. I caught back up within about 6 seconds from him. But as he crossed the fuel line, he shut the fuel pump off to make people think he'd run out of gas and parked in the first turn. But they pulled the car back and they made him drain what was left in the tank and then filled it again, and it held about 18 gallons. You know, he's still a friend and he's a good guy, very creative. And he was a very good driver. He drove for Shelby. He drove Mustangs for Shelby in the Trans Am horse prep. But no, he's a good guy.
Well, the time with the 240Z and the 510, as you mentioned, it was a good time for competition. It was things were going well for the team. You had quite a well organized team. You had a very young team that Peter had put together, and there were a lot of those guys were not only very professional, but they were quite bright, and many of them went on to significant other careers. I believe Trevor Harris went on. Eventually went on to Indy as the engineering side and whatnot. But to form the relationships with your teammates that Peter put together, how was it to work for Peter, and how was it working with all those teammates in this new environment? Since you were supposed to come in as a janitor, and here you are winning all the races. That must be quite something. And how did that go with your team?
Well, I wasn't actually the janitor at PRE, but. Everybody got along great, and Trevor Harris was the engineer. He also worked for Gurney on the Indy cars. He worked for Don Nichols on the Formula One Shadows, and on the very first Shadow sports cars. He's a brilliant, brilliant guy. And Mac Tilton, everybody, you probably all got Tilton parts in your car, or half of you do anyway. And he was just, one of the guys. John Knapp, who's doing work for the government, drone stuff. John Caldwell built engines for for Newman and Bob Sharp, and Richie Ginther with the Porsches. He did all that. So we had really the best team, and an adequate driver and really good team. So that's they could have done. I think if the team had persevered and gotten funding, we would have been pretty successful at any kind of racing. But unfortunately, Peter got interested in hang gliders, and he wasn't successful in getting further sponsorship after Datsun, and Datsun didn't have any cars to go into the higher levels of professional racing, so the team just kind of folded and people went their various ways. Most of them were successful, except for me. I don't mean to be overly, humble, but I did okay, but I didn't do as well as I wish I had done. I wanted to race at Indy and all that stuff. But I raced at Le Mans several times. I did a lot of stuff.
To give credit where credit's due, you have driven your whole career, and there are people out here that have worked hard to try to get to that level and haven't made it. So in a lot of ways, you've done very well in motorsports and in your career. You've done this pretty much your whole life, and for all of us here, this is a fraction of the people in this country that know your name. It's synonymous with the old Datsuns, because I guess that's where you made your first big splash. But anybody that's stayed involved in racing, they've seen your name throughout the years. So it is quite an accomplishment. I think probably give Peter a round give John a round of applause. as John alluded, he went on to run multiple different types of cars. You've run just about every type of vehicle out there. You've run open wheel, you've run sedans, as you mentioned, GTP cars. You've run at Sebring, you've run 24-hour Le Mans multiple times. I mean, that's a dream for most of us that would ever want to get out there. But
my only question is, which one was the scariest? Which of your race cars you've driven has been the most terrifying?
At Shelby's, there was a guy, I mean, if you want to hear another story.
Yes.
There was the machinist, his name was Bob Skinner, and he was building a dragster. And we all, we weren't drag racers, we were more interested in, the Cobra stuff, the sports car racing. But he was, every Monday we'd go, how'd you do this? He was building a car, it wasn't finished yet when we first, and we were at lunch, sitting around in the shop, and he was talking about his car, and a friend of mine who was Bruce Burness said, why don't you let John drive your car? I mean, I had no interest in driving a dragster. And he said, do you have fast reactions? And I said, I guess, I don't know. Yeah, pretty fast. So he took a $1 bill or a $10 bill or whatever and dropped it, and I could catch it. So, well, your reactions are fast enough. So they finished the car and they started running it. And every Monday when how'd you do? Well, we crammed, the parachute failed and went off the end and damaged the car. Or this guy, the driver was, not fast and didn't react fast enough. Always had something wrong. And then they got a driver named Mike Sorokin. Did anybody here know anything about drag racing? They got a driver named Mike Sorokin, and he was good, but he had a problem with there were 3 guys that owned the car, Skinner, Crosser, and Joe, and apparently Mike's girlfriend was being tantalized by one of the 3. So they had to get rid of one of them, so they got rid of Sorokin. And then they went through another couple drivers, and then one day at the shop, Skinner said, do you still want to drive our car? And I never said I wanted to drive it. I just caught this bill. And I said, yeah, I guess so. So he said, okay, well, you come out this weekend, we're going to fire this next driver, but he knows he's gone, but he's got to show you how to pack the chute. I said, why do I have to pack the chute? And he said, because if it doesn't open, it's not our fault. This is true. Amazing. I'm not making this up. So I went out there, and the guy's name, the driver's name was Goop Teller, and he showed me how to pack the chute when the run was done, put it back in the little black thing. And the next week I was going to drive it, and I'd never been on a drag strip in my life. And this is a AA fuel drag strip. A bad run is 180. And so the first pass I made, they let me drive it one time back to after you do a run, you put alcohol instead of you don't put any, you drain the nitro, put some alcohol, run it back on the return road. That's the way they did it anyway. And to flush the nitro out of the system because it's very corrosive. So I drove it back the day I learned to pack the chute. And it felt pretty slow. I mean, you step on it, not much happens because it was on alcohol. So the next week it's on nitro, and it scared the shit out of me. You touch the throttle and it explodes. It feels like. And the first run I made, was a single because they didn't have licenses back then. Now they make you learn how to do it before you do it. Back then they didn't. And the first run was 180, and I got got halfway down and I kind of eased out of the throttle, and I got pissed off because I didn't let off, but I got, and so the next time I didn't do that, because I think I made about 3 runs that first day, and the best was like 180, 182, something like that. And that was terrifying. So that's it. That was a dragster. And I drove for 3 weeks, and the best run I did, I think, was 189 at a 8.0. But, you know, back then, they do it in 3 seconds, 3.5, 4 seconds. But this was 1964, and that's how fast they were then. They ended up, I had to go to a sports car race at Watkins Glen, so I couldn't race it for a while. So they got Sorokin back, and and then they started winning, and he became very famous. They became one of the very top teams in the country. And then they stopped racing the dragster, got out of drag racing. They got rid of Crosser. It was Skinner and Joe. And they took over, they got into road racing, and they ran John Cannon, won the Formula 5000 championship. Later they ran Francois Sever in the Can-Am. And Sorokin stayed in drag racing and was one of the top drivers. And then he was killed, I can't remember, about 67, 68, when a clutch blew up, or a flywheel, and cut the car in half. And I can't remember what. I think it made Lions or one of the tracks. So anyway, that's my scariest car.
Well, the clutch explosions are pretty scary. I mean, I think most of the people here that's been involved in motorsports, they're at least my age or older. There's a famous shot of Don Garlett's car being cut in half in a very similar explosion. I think most of us that have ever seen or been involved with drag racing know that level of motorsport at that time, with the safety regulations that you say were pretty minimal, those guys were really taking a serious risk, and at that time you probably knew that.
Probably knew it, did you say? I didn't think about it. No, and any racing was more dangerous back then. But no, I didn't. I just think I did something stupid by saying I'd drive it, because I didn't. I wasn't even interested in drag racing. But I'm glad I did it, because it makes a good story.
Yeah, I think you got a question out there.
So back at the VRE team, driving 510, in the 85 car, you had a couple of different drivers. One was Bobby Allison. What was it like? Did you spend any time on track with this other collection of people, and people like Bobby Allison? How were they as drivers in the 510?
They were really good. The other drivers that drove as guests were Herschel McGriff from up here, Bobby Allison, Jim Fitzgerald, Peter Gregg, Bob Sharp. Yeah, those were all guys the second year that we stuck in the third car. And they were, I mean, it was a thrill for me to be racing against Bobby Allison more than any of the others. And it was even a bigger thrill because I beat him. But the guy that was the best in the 510, the best, the most competitive, difficult to beat, was Peter Gregg.
Well, just coming back to the 510s and the driving that you had, how many championships were you seriously involved in, and how many championships have you won over your career, being over so many years?
Very few. I won a Pacific Coast Championship in my Lotus 23. I won the Pacific Coast Championship in the Z car in '70. I won the National Championship with the Z car in '70, and the National Championship in '71, and then 2 Trans Am championships. But I never really competed for a championship after that. The whole rest of my, I ran races, but never in in good teams, but never, a full season of specifically trying to win a championship. Not that I could have if I had, but I just didn't. When I drove for Jaguar, I think we only ran 7 races that year. And the Busby cars, even though we won Riverside in '85, the Goodrich tires really sucked. And they finally got better, but not, then later they got better, but they were never as good as the Goodyears. It's a good company though. I mean, they make great off-road tires.
P cars? I know it's a Datsun thing, but I was always fascinated by P cars. What were they like to drive?
They were really fast.
They were like 2 seconds a lot faster than the Indy cars here at Portland.
Yeah. Was that the Nissan or the Toyotas? The Toyotas were Nissan.
Toyotas were the fast.
Race cars?
What's that? Yeah, the Gurney Toyotas were the last of the GTP cars, and they put the Nissan. The Nissan needed another car at that time, but they're very thrilling to drive. Lots of downforce and they're hard to drive because they're physically kind of hard because the steering gets real heavy and they go around corners really fast, and they like the Nissan at one point had close to 1,000 horsepower for qualifying, but they couldn't race at that. And Devendorf was kind of a horsepower freak, and he blew a lot of engines because they didn't want to turn them back down, which they should have. But Nissan dominated from '88 through for 4 years. So, and then Toyota took over at the end. But Nissan had kind of needed another car by then. And I was only involved in that GTP car in the first year in '88. Not the first year I think was '85. But it was a really bad car at first. And it was Devendorf and Tony Adamowitz. It was black. They were sponsored by a company called the California Cooler Company. California Cooler was maybe like an energy drink, only not so much. They started calling the car, nicknamed it because it crashed so often, parts would break, and they called it the California Coffin. But I didn't drive it then, I drove it later.
Well, you've been involved in multiple disciplines of motorsport, but one of them that was touched on, I think, in the another book that most of us have a copy of is the How to Hot Rod Your 510, 610, 240Z. And there's a one-page or two-page mention in there of Pete Rock when they took the car down to Baja. So of course, you're in a completely different element here. You're everything to do with everything you're doing is another game. So what was it like to go down with Pete Rock and do the Baja in a 510?
Well, back then I didn't like Pete Rock very much. And to spend 24 miserable hours with a guy you really didn't care for. I like him a lot now. I didn't appreciate him then as much. It was an interesting race. And our car was totally ill-prepared. It's well-prepared, but it was ill-equipped for that because we were sponsored by Sugar Daddy, Suckers, and Goodyear. So Goodyear said they wanted us to run steel-belted radial street tires. Well, not good for Mexico because there's a lot of, bad roads and muddy stuff, and that's not the right tire. Well, we started. That was a weird year. We started in Mexicali and went over to Camalú and then ended up in La Paz. Well, Peter started driving and he drove the first stint, and I got behind the wheel in Camalú, and I wasn't out of the sort of pit area before he starts complaining about my driving. He thought I was the greatest driver in the world when I was driving in the Trans Am, but now I'm a schmuck because I'm hitting bumps, and you missed one, you want to go back and get that one back there. So late at night, I shouldn't even tell this on him, but yeah. If he ever comes to this, don't tell him I told you the story. Was about midnight, and we stopped, we had a crew, our BRE crew, and they were flying down from checkpoint to checkpoint and servicing the car. And this particular, I think it was about close to midnight, and Peter gets out of the car, and I get out of the car, and they're doing whatever, checking the oil. And Peter goes and opens the trunk, and he starts screaming, "Fuck, fuck!" And he starts, starts throwing things. And I thought, you know, we didn't know, we see kind of going crazy. Well, he said that he had so looked forward to his beef jerky at the next stop because he'd stashed it in the trunk. And it was just covered in dirt. And so what he was throwing was the beef jerky. And we didn't even know what it was because he just went berserk. So anyway, we continued to race, and now I'm driving, and we got to a place where there was a water crossing, and there was a guy there with for some reason he had a wetsuit, not a wetsuit, but a over plastic thing for rain, and a hat. Poncho. Yeah, like a poncho and some kind of a rubber hat, whatever it was. Anyway, he said, we stopped at the water, and he said, just go straight through, that's the best way. And Pete looks around and he says, go over here to the side. So, you know, I drove over there. And he said, this is better. Okay, just go and cross here, because he thought the water was too. So I went and I high centered on a rock in the middle of the water, and we see other people just going right where the guy told us to go. No problem, just go through. The water may have been 2 feet deep, I don't know. Anyway, we're high centered on the rock, on the skid plate, and Peter commandeered a guy with it seems like a Bronco that had a winch, and the guy didn't want to help us because he was in the race too, but they pulled us back, and then we went to the place where we were supposed to go in the first place and went right through. Long story short, we made it down there with a broken suspension, and we got lost again. But a friend ran the race who worked for Interpark, which was kind of a division of DRE at that time, and he had a private Datsun that he was driving with one of our employees, Kirk Allegro. And a few weeks after the race, there was a big party, I think in Laguna Beach, somewhere down that way. And it was at a doctor's house. And the doctor happened to be, well, they said to the doctor, my friend, his name was Mike Anson. He's passed away now. He was a writer, magazine writer. He said, I was in the Baja. He said, I drove a Datsun. This doctor was the guy with the rubber stuff. He was a volunteer doctor that would go down there, and he was stationed at this water crossing. And Mike said, I was in the Baja, and what did you drive? The doctor said, what did you drive? And he said, I drove a Datsun 510. And he said, you weren't one of those two assholes in the green one. And he wasn't.
Well, there are other little stories that float around about your time at BRE and funny things that have happened to cars. There's a rumor about a story about the number 46 car and an untimely trip back to the shop where you were a bit surprised when you got to the shop and the car was no longer behind you as it was when you left the track. I just wonder if you wanted to share a little bit of a story and a trailer and a number 46 car coming home from a race one weekend.
Yeah, that wasn't what happened. It wasn't me. It wasn't me. It was Kirk Allegro. No, it was my car that we had a little fender bender with Milt Minter and a Porsche at Phoenix. It needed a little paint work. Not much. I mean, it was not badly damaged, but it needed some body work. And Kirk put it on the they loaded it on the BRE trailer, which is an open trailer, and it wasn't, attached very well. And he was just driving like 4 miles to Dave Kent's shop to have the car repaired. And he pulled out from, I think it was at Hawthorne Boulevard, and the car fell off the trailer backwards and ran into a fire plug or something. I don't know. And did a lot more damage than it was going to be repaired. But that wasn't me. I didn't have anything to do with that.
That's good to clear your name on that one. So, in all these years of racing, and yourself personally, you've been around many people, but there must have been somebody that helped you throughout all the years, a partner that you've been throughout your life that's helped you along with racing and supported you all these years. And I know there's a few people out here asked me, there's got to be somebody else that's helped you throughout the years and kept you going, a little bit of inspiration and whatnot, because you've been racing for a long time.
Yeah, you got to have a good woman. You'll be, before you know it, you'll be in a real job. So, Sylvia, my wife, is that person for me. I think she respected what I was trying to do because she's a writer, and I respect what she tries to do, and both of them are very difficult things to do. And we've both been, remotely successful, and appreciate because of the empathy for the other that, that you can't just have a person that doesn't have that sort of appreciation for what you're doing, and you have to appreciate what they're trying to do. So that was it. And then there was my best friend, George Boskoff, who technically did a lot of work, helped me a lot. He worked at Shelby's. He's the guy that did the first engine swap on the Sunbeam Alpine that made it into a Tiger. And he's still alive. He's 92 years old. He lives in Hawaii. And he was, as far as a male, he was the biggest help I had. But I'd say Sylvia was the biggest.
I guess I'll probably give a hand to Sylvia for all her back. I know she's not here. This is obviously my first time meeting you, but I know there's some people in the crowd here who've met you and your wife in the past, or Sylvia, and they speak with extremely high respect of her and what she's also helped and done in the past. There's lots of crazy stories that most racing drivers will be able to share over the years. Well, thank you for sharing some of this, but what is literally the craziest thing that's happened to you as a driver over the years, regardless of what car it was in, just the absolute most off-the-wall thing that's happened, either on the track or off the track, that's really made you shake your head?
Actually, another little mention of Sylvia, she was probably the best race car timer in the country. She worked for Newman for 5 years, and she's got a pin from winning the Indy 500 with Bobby Rahal. She was a timer, but now she's, an antique. She's a dinosaur because it's all done electronically, but she used to do it all with one stopwatch and do the subtraction. She did the 24 hours of Le Mans several times, and the one question everybody always asked her is, how do you go 24 hours without peeing? And I don't know, she did it. And she couldn't leave and go pee because she was also doing a lap chart, and you can't stop doing a lap chart during a race, or you're done, or it's done. So it was weirdest, or
The craziest thing that's happened to you as a driver, on or off the track?
the craziest thing that ever happened to me as a driver was in 1964 at Sebring, when all this stuff's in that. I'm not trying to sell books. I mean, it's all in that Shelby book. I wanted to go to Sebring. I wasn't the janitor anymore. I was a parts chaser and did some light fabricating, but I wanted to go to Sebring because I loved Sebring. I'd been there as a student in college 2 years, and it was always my favorite American race. And I wanted to go in '64, and the team was running five cars. But there was no reason to take me or my friend Jeffrey. But we let them know how much we wanted to go. So they called me to the office and said, "We understand you and Jeffrey want to go to Sebring." And I said, "Yeah, we do. We will give you, Mr. Shelby has authorized to give each of you $25 if you'll be night watchman when you get there." Because back then they had the big hangars that the teams would use for working on the cars. It's different now. If you drive your own cars there and back, $50. We didn't have a car that would maybe even make it to Florida and back. It was a long way to Florida from Southern California. So we had a guy we didn't care for much, but he had a Carmen Ghia. And we said, if we got another guy, could we get another $25? So that would be 75. And yeah, I think we could do that. So we asked John Shoup, we said, you want to go to Sebring in your Volkswagen? And we got $25 for gas for each of us, so we got $75. And okay, yeah, he agreed to go. He was the electric guy. He wired all the cars. So we took off about a week before the race at night and drove. We started driving to Sebring, and we got about halfway to Phoenix, and it was Shoup's turn to drive his own car. And he drove probably 10 miles, and he started to fall asleep. So we couldn't let him continue to drive his car. We had to, and he was kind of a heavy-set fellow, so he couldn't fit in the back of a Carmen Ghia. It was small. So he had to sit in the passenger seat, and Jeffrey and I took turns driving to Florida. It took 54 hours to get there without sleeping. And we got there, we checked into a cheap hotel in town. Back then, they had tech inspection in town in a circle, like in the South. They have some sort of traffic, not traffic circles, but like park-type circles. And that's where the cars would be driven from the track, really 4 or 5 miles into town for technical inspection. So Jeffrey and Shoup went to bed, and I said, I got to go watch tech inspection. So, and we hadn't had any sleep, and now it's like 8 o'clock in the morning. You can hear the cars in the town. So I got up and I walked into town, we were in like a block from the tech inspection, and I ran into Ken Miles and Lou Spencer, who were both driving on the team. And Ken, you know, Ken Miles is, right? Anybody? Anyway. Yeah, he was Shelby's probably #1 driver. He said, have you got an FIA license? And I said, no, I just have an SCCA club license. And I kind of lost it, I don't know where it is. And he said, I said, why would I need an FIA license? And he said, well, we've got 9 drivers and 5 cars, so we might need you to drive the 427 with me. I'm the night watchman. So he said, he took a little piece of paper out of his pocket, or wherever he had it, wrote a note that said, John Morton is qualified for an FIA license. He said, take this to the race headquarters and see if they'll give you a license. So I did. I took it. They gave me a license. And I didn't have a suit. I didn't have a helmet or anything. So I went to, they sold, you know, like they do now. They had a vendor that sold suits at $15. They weren't fireproof, but none of them were fireproof. It was just as good as any of them. So I bought a suit, and I borrowed they had a preliminary motorcycle race before the 12-hour the day before, and I borrowed a helmet from one of the motorcycle races. And then practice came, and I was going to practice. And Miles was driving the 427, and I asked Al Dowd, who was the team manager, he said, when am I going to practice? Because I'd never been on the track. I'd been there as a spectator twice, and he said, I'm not letting you practice until Shelby gets here. I'm not going to take that responsibility. So I didn't, about that time, Miles ran into a tree and cracked some ribs, and pretty badly damaged the car. So we spent that night repairing the car. The frame was bent, had a porta power to straighten the frame a little bit. And several people, the crew was working on it and got it good enough to race. And then once they had it fixed good enough, they said, we want to put another engine. We want to put the Holman Moody 427 engine, a better engine. So they had to put another engine. It was one day in between. The crash must have happened on a Thursday, and the race was Saturday. So the race started, and I hadn't practiced, and I wasn't going to drive. I mean, obviously, they had 5 cars, and the other drivers were Gurney, Phil Hill, Dave McDonald, Bob Holbert, Bondurant, Joe Schlesser, Lou Spencer, Ken Miles, and no partner for him. But they thought one of the cars is going to break and they'll just switch drivers around. Well, none of the car. I'm just bringing tires that came off the cars to Goodyear and bringing fresh tires back to the pit. And then I'm thinking, none of these cars are breaking. What the hell are they going to do? They're certainly not going to put me in the car. But Miles has been with cracked ribs. He's been out there for 3 hours. And then Shelby, somebody said, Shelby wants to see you. He was in the trailer. They didn't have motorhomes, and they had trailers they'd drag in. And he was in there with some Ford people. And I went in this, and he said, you know this track? And I said, yeah. Yeah, I know it. And he said, when Ken comes in, if he needs help, you take over, okay? And I said, yeah, okay. And that's really the scaredest I've ever been. And so I went and got my suit and the other guy's helmet, and I put it on, and I came in. I didn't want him to want help. He had to get out of the cars back then to refuel, and he got up. They still do now, but there was a time I don't think he did. He got out of the car, and I got this suit that didn't fit. It was kind of baggy, and he didn't know this was happening. I said, do you need relief? And he looks at me like that. And he said, yes. Oh, shit. Anyway, so I got in and I drove it. It had a lot of little problems. It continued to have problems and had some problem with the brakes, and the engine started. This over a period of hours. And I find he never got, I drove it the rest of the time until just at dusk it blew up. The engine blew. So that was my weirdest race. Because that was my first professional race I'd ever been on. I'd never raced anything but a Lotus 7 until then. I didn't know it was going to be that, my favorite, not favorite, but my most memorable race, but kind of.
So a lot of us made it down to Monterey on one historic, and big crowd of Datsun guys on the hill at the top of Corkscrew. We got to watch you go out to the Camaro.
Camaro?
It was a Camaro that who was it? Edelbrock.
Oh,
He was
yeah.
trying to get by. So you tell us anything about that particular, because we're up there watching this, and there was some excitement on top of that hill. We'd like to know what you were thinking. If you can remember the...
Well, yeah, I would think this is vintage race, and it was, they resurrected the 510, the BRE 510, for that race, because it was the 30th anniversary of the 71 race where it won the championship. And Vic Edelbrock in a Camaro, it was a Smoky Unit Camaro, was holding me up. He was really, and he was on purpose. I mean, he didn't want to be passed by a Datsun. I don't blame him. I wouldn't have wanted to be passed by a Datsun in that car either. But, yeah, and I could have just sat there and won, you know, beaten all the 2-liter cars, except John Norman in an Alfa was catching me because he was holding me up. So I finally thought, you know, I got to make a move. I got to get by him, and I did. And I actually hit him. He turned in on me, but it was one of those things. You know, it was a racing incident. and he spun. It spun him out. Huh? Oh, did it? Yeah. Anyway, so I beat John Norman. I beat the 2-liter cars.
And I noticed the crack is still on the fender too, so that's...
Yeah, it's still there. Yeah, and it had been a strut, but I think that's fixed. But it's still, you know, I only had a couple laps to go.
You stayed ahead of the Alpha, which is proper.
Yeah. He was a little pissed off, but
You're going to be down at the Historics again this August, I hear?
yeah.
Where do you drive?
A Sunbeam Tiger that I'm supposed to test Tuesday, and then which I've raced a lot and I hate. It's the worst car I've ever driven. I've been driving it for 12 or 13 years. And an absolute perfect replica of the Z car that I, you know, that's been...
The one that was for sale for 75 grand?
No, was it for, no, not that one. No, this is one that the guy didn't build it as a race car, he built it as a replica of the BRE car with no intention to ever race it, just as a show car. And then he got the bright idea that he put a Rebello engine in it and I would drive it at Del Mar. So that's it.
Between the 510 and the Z car, what did you like and dislike about both models?
I like the speed of the Z was faster. I made a little bit more money with the 510, so I like the 510 because of the incredible success it had. They both did. They were both very successful. But the 510, I don't know, because it was even at a fairly low level, it was professional racing. So I guess that 510.
I was introducing my son to some older movies. We watched the Cannonball Run movie, and then we watched the Gumball Rally. And I was watching the credits at the end of the movie. I saw that there was John Morton credited for being one of the drivers or passengers of the Jaguar. So I went on the internet real quick and spent about 30 seconds of research on Google. And it was unclear if that was actually you, John Morton, or another John Morton.
No, it was me.
It was you.
Yeah.
And so you did some stunt work as well? Like what was your whole career then?
I had a friend that was a makeup man that got a job training actors for that movie because he raced. And there were a lot of actors, and the director didn't want to have to use doubles all the time, so he wanted to train the actors to be able to do a lot of their own driving. And the two of them were New Yorkers that didn't even know how to drive. Raul Julia and a guy named Nicholas Pryor. So we went out to race. They hired me to, as well as Wes, to train the actors. And after we did that, they kept us on to do double work, and that's how they. And the writer, a man named Leon Capitanos, who was pretty successful with. He did Moscow on the Hudson and Down and Out in Beverly Hills. That was maybe his first big movie, the Gumball Rally, if it was considered a big movie. And he wrote pieces for all the stuntmen, little bit parts, so that's where the Jaguar came in.
I was wondering, what were some of your favorite tracks to drive and visit, and how many different tracks around the world do you think you got to drive, and what are some of your favorite cars?
Gosh, I don't know how many tracks. I could figure it out, but it'd take me a while. A lot. My favorites in this country are Elkhart Lake, Watkins Glen's great, Laguna Seca, Mid-Ohio. All those are great tracks. It's really hard to pick one out. I pick Elkhart as much for the ambiance of the area as, you know, the Siebkens and the bar. It's a kind of a bar and a hotel. I don't know, there's Elkhart special because I saw my first sports car race there when I was 15. But that's as much as the quality of the track. It's a great track. And Le Mans is one of my favorites because it's just such a thrill to go over there, and the track is spectacular and kind of scary. And my favorite car, did you say? My favorite car has always been the front engine Scarab since I was a kid. So I got to race that, and years and years later, because it was built in '58. So that's my favorite car. Still, it's gotten pretty valuable. It's like $10 million or so. And only 3 of them. And I wrecked it. I wrecked it at Riverside in 2010 or 11 or something like that. But it's been restored and it's perfect again, better than it was before I wrecked it. It wasn't my fault.
Did you get a bill in the mail?
No, I got to drive it. I tested it after it was finished. No, a car ran into me. The guy screwed up and hit me.
Those are expensive accidents.
It was, yeah, real expensive.
Your movie career, as it were, it actually started before the Gumball Rally, and for Nissan had you do some advertisements, which we just saw one here earlier. There was also one that you used in the 510 where you, I don't know who their actor wife was on that particular clip, or went out where you drove the 510 out to the track, and I think it was just you're heading off on your day to work or something like that, and then you show up the track. Maybe you just explain about these commercials and what it was like to do those.
That wasn't a commercial. That was, well, the whole thing was
Emotional.
It was that Against All Odds.
Yeah. Oh, so it was part of that production.
Yeah, and the actress was my wife. My real wife, not Sylvia. Before Sylvia.
Yeah.
I was married to her.
What did you think of doing that production as a whole? What was that like? Because you're a driver, and then they're kind of asking you to do these kind of forays into acting.
I don't know. It wasn't a big deal. But I don't know. It was kind of. I'm glad they did it because it's kind of a neat thing to have, but I didn't think much about it. They did another one the next year, but I don't think it ever came out.
So there's something on tape somewhere that nobody's seen.
Yeah, I don't know if it ever was ever completed, but I think it's something Datsun funded. I'm not sure if Datsun did it or not. No, that was a runoff thing. No, this was another Trans Am movie of the '72 season, and I don't know what happened to it. A guy named Jim Decker did it out there somewhere.
So before we get to wrap this up here, is there any other questions that you guys would like to ask John?
Do you have any Datsuns now?
No, I don't. I have a Nissan pickup. I have an '89 Maxima, but my only sort of collector car is a Lotus Super 7.
Nice.
Is there any other questions that you guys have for John here?
One, just fast. In the early days of the VRA 510,
Yeah, well, you know, I never got to know him as well as Peter did, but yeah, I did. He was an amazing man and a real enthusiast. And I don't know how much we would have been able to do without him, because he was, I think, instrumental in bringing the Z car over to America. So I credit him with a lot of our success. He wasn't day to day in the shop. I mean, he wasn't like hands-on with us. But Peter had a different relationship with him than I did. He was just somebody that, you know, he was always, he didn't go to all the races, but he went to some, and he was extremely, you know, a lot of corporate people, just bottom line, sort of. He wasn't like that. I remember asking him in a trip we did to the Nismo Festival in Japan in 2001, I think it was, and we were riding on the bus, and I asked him what he drove, and he said, I drive our RAV4. I said, that's a Toyota, and he said, yeah. He said, if Nissan built something like that, I'd buy that too. I'd drive that.
Well, John, is there any other questions? Oh, the crowd? Nope. Yeah, one more.
Just a quick one. When I was speaking to you a little earlier about when Paul Newman in that classification, I know, was there any type, I know that he was running 510 class, the classification, were you guys running around in that same type of classification at that time?
No, we ran we were finished with the 510s at the end of 72. And I don't think he started until 74 or 75.
But I know your name was mentioned when they actually did a series on his storyline as a racer. Your name was actually brought up in.
Yeah, Adam Carolla produced that, and he was a big Datsun fan, and I was part of the Datsun sort of legacy, I guess, so he used me. And Robert Redford, who's probably never owned a Datsun.
We want to thank you because you really actually helped establish the Datsun Nissan car legacy out there.
Yeah.
And we have a lot of respect for you.
Well, thank you, and I, you know, I can't believe this many people even. I mean, not this many. I mean, there are thousands of people that admire that history, and I'm always really gratified by that. But just like the Shelby stuff, when we were starting, when that was starting, I didn't play nearly as a big a part in that as Datsun stuff. But I participated in both of those and had no idea the history that was being done. And I don't think anybody, you know, nobody says, well, maybe Neil Armstrong. Maybe he knew what a big deal that was. But I didn't, and none of the Shelby people, they were just doing their jobs, and the BRE people. But it's very gratifying to know that stuff's remembered this long ago, a long time ago.
I think for some of us, I'm in the generation that grew up after you'd finished what you did with the BRE car. I mean, I was born in '72, so it puts me in the year that you were doing this, but I grew up with, my father had a copy of the How to Hot Rod Race, the original version of the Bob Moore book, and I grew up as a little kid, you know, thumbing through these and these pictures. There's photos of you. There's more than many mentions of you throughout the course of the 510 and the 240Z, and I mean, you were very instrumental to a lot of people. Your name was always synonymous with what you became. So my father raced and rallied the 510. I grew up around that. My brother's here with me. He can attest to the crazy things that my father was up to. And of course, it was in my blood. I sold all my bicycles just before getting my driver's license to shell out and buy my first 510. And I went on to rally. I went on to ice race, and I'm a machinist by trade and a fabricator, and I've built lots of stuff and been involved with this wonderful community. But what's out here is just a small fraction, having been involved on on the internet side, the amount of enthusiasm that is evolved around the Z car and the 510s is unbelievable. And as a guy that helps build some of the components that help keeping these cars going, like there's lots of guys out here that have developed bits. It's amazing that this is still going, and it's really gratifying to have you that really set the stage for a lot of this and made these cars so popular in the first place to come out and address us and answer our questions. And you know, we're all a nutty crowd, but it's great to have you out, and we really thank you for taking the time out of your life and to come and address us and really personally get down and talk with us and spend some time with us. Thank you very much, John.
Thank you very much for having me, and I've enjoyed it. Do you know that Bob War? That's not his name.
No, it's not his real name. No, that's
he did it because Barb Wire. Yeah, you know that. Anyway, I really enjoy meeting people that have the enthusiasm that you people have, whether it's about Datsuns or Porsches or Ferraris or Lotuses. And I'm glad I'm attached to Datsuns, even though I don't really own one right now. But they're a really cool car, and it never ceases to amaze me how many people younger than all this started that don't remember it, but that know about it. And it's very rewarding for me to know that people that young remember, even though they can't shoot.
We should get a donation going to build you a Datsun.
I don't have any room. It's all full of motorcycles.
Yes. So you can cruise. Let's do it.
And you will be spending here tomorrow. You'll be here tomorrow, part of the day or all the day, or? Well, there'll be, if you're walking around and whatnot, there'll be lots of people out there to show you those crazy machines that they put together. And the wonderful thing about this group is unlike many collector marks where everybody's worried about the exact bolt, the awesome thing about this group is you will find absolutely everything and anything under the sun, and especially with the 510, it's been that car that, I guess because so many of them were produced in the beginning, it's a clean shade, clean slate every time. Everybody has done something radically different, and that's a cool thing about this group. So as you walk around, I'm sure you've seen it. If you've seen it before, you'll see something wacky and wild again, and it's great to have you out to enjoy this with us, and we look forward to seeing you around tomorrow. And thanks again for spending this time with us tonight.